Hello and welcome to the Justice Factor. On June 16 every year, we celebrate the young people who stood up against apartheid in 1976. One organization does not just remember the past, it helps young entrepreneurs to start, nurture, and build their businesses while they create jobs. My guest today is businessman and founder of My Startup SA, Andile Khumalo. But first, we look at the state of the South African economy. It's been 2 weeks of bad news, culminating on Friday with further bad news by ratings agencies Fitch and S&P. Can the new cabinet revive our economy? What needs to be done to give us jobs and prosperity? My guests to discuss this are Economist xhanti Payi and Dr. Roelof Botha. Dr. Botha, you're one of the most optimistic people I know. So I have to give you two things. 0.6% in the first quarter, one notch above junk by S&P. Surely even you have to say things are not looking good here.
Well, if you look at the reasons why Fitch downgraded us, it's quite apparent that they're fumbling Fitch maybe. Would be a good description, because they cite, they tell us, oh, it's the platinum strike, and an hour later the announcement is made that the strike is probably over. And then these subjective issues, the choice of the cabinet. I mean, it's not the cabinet that runs the country, it's the cabinet plus the DGs, plus the chief directors, and they have to implement policy. So the reasons are not very good. And the other point is, and the most important point is, has the bond yield moved? No, it hasn't. So quite frankly, I think Fitch will have to reassess that decision quite soon.
Payi, do you agree with that this is a storm in a teacup?
There's certainly a sense that these ratings agencies, because of the reputation they've earned since the financial crisis and the things they didn't do, for example, in Europe, in warning investors about what was happening, what was coming on, they feel the need now to sort of even to overshoot. I think there's a sense in that, because the South African economy, in a sense, while it's struggling, in terms of our debt levels, it's still a relatively healthy economy that can still pay and meet its obligations. And the politics aren't to the level at which we have been crippled, even though obviously there are challenges. So the rating itself is rather harsh for the kind of problems that we're facing.
But a guy like me sits here and I look at the numbers that you guys deal with every day, and it's 0.6% contraction in the first quarter. It's 1.9% for the whole year last year. The year before, we seem to be on a decline here. I look at S&P and Fitch and I think, maybe they have a point.
Well, they do have a point with regard to the assessment that our economy is growing at below its potential, certainly. But we must remember that our major trading bloc in Europe went right back into recession. That hit us quite hard. The labour unrest is a huge point of concern, and that is specifically mentioned in the NDP, in the National Development Plan. It talks about the need for labour market reform. We must make it easier for employers to create jobs in South Africa. And the NDP wants to do exactly that. So I think personally that all the ratings agencies and whoever is out there that criticizes our economic performance must just give us a chance to start implementing the NDP. Now that Eurozone is probably out of recession and the US is growing at quite a nice rate, interest rates are relatively low, and massive amounts of money into infrastructure. And as you've pointed out to me recently, the infrastructure acceleration bill, which has just been passed, I don't know exactly what the terminology is.
Bill,
So there's a lot of positives coming into the equation right now. And if government can just sit down and get the best business brains in the country together, and perhaps also sit down with some trade union leaders, some responsible ones, and thrash out a pragmatic way how to take the NDP forward.
Let me stop you there and just say to you, Roelof, but I'm going to give you another chance to answer this, because you mentioned trade unions. Now, it may be that the mine workers' strike is over, but another one is looming. The metal workers' strike is coming up.
I mean, that's exactly one of the problems that Dr. mentions, this idea that there are things to be done. And the question really is, are we getting there? Because we have a lot of decisions to make and actually to implement them. Now, we've been in the stall position for quite some time. And the question, I think, that is partly being raised here is, given the restructuring of the economy that we have to do, given the challenge we face both domestically and internationally, particularly given how competition has risen against us, are we brave enough? If we look at the structure, particularly, I mean, in our social political structure, what we have within the tripartite alliance, government, labor, do we have the capacity to do the right things that we need to do now? I think that is the main question that we have to ask ourselves. And I think at this point,
SNP said in their statement, I know you say they're woolly and all over the place, but they said, Xhanti, give me an answer, that they said they have a lack of confidence in our cabinet's ability to restructure and to go in and say, these are the structural reforms that we need and we're going to implement them. I mean, do you think that do you have the confidence that this cabinet can do that?
Ministers come and go. I think ultimately it's about the policy and it's about the technocrats within the government departments. And obviously if you have a good minister and he or she has strong leadership skills, then they can take this forward. But the number one priority of this government should be, and I think most of them will agree with me, is we need to create jobs, especially private sector jobs. The minute you do that, the cash registers start ringing at SARS, because there's income tax collections, there's VAT collections, etc. And then government has the fiscal resources with which they can deal with poverty. So if they can create private sector jobs, and the private sector creates jobs. So speak to those people. Find out what incentives do you need to create more jobs. And it can be done, but it needs to go to a pragmatic level now, and not just plans.
Xhanti, electricity outages we've seen with the beginning of the World Cup, suddenly we're scared that, I won't be able to watch my Germany or Brazil match and so forth. Do you think this will have an impact on second quarter and third quarter growth figures? What is the impact of the possibility?
I think it has particularly the entrepreneurs, the smaller sector. I mean, big companies can afford generators, and many of them do actually go with them. What we have is a small entrepreneur, somebody who owns a butchery, who's starting to run this thing, and there's no power for a day or two. That business is ruined for 2 days, and that's people's stock, because many of them rely on a day-to-day basis of stocks. So that hurts the small sector, and that's why we need to take up this problem as soon as possible to make sure that there's a reliable sources of electricity and energy across the board. I mean, this is where it is hurting smaller people, and I think our economy is particularly hurtful. These problems we have in labor, in electricity, hurt the small guys at the bottom, who we actually need to create jobs and to keep our economy viable. And I think these are the small touch points that we are not getting around into actually accessing. But certainly the point is, can we turn this economy around? I mean, the political we have really good technocrats, particularly in these areas. But the leadership that is necessary to push for different kinds of policy. I mean, what we saw at the beginning of early 2000s, well, I suppose after the democracy was founded, is that we had the kind of leadership that said, we will focus on making sure that debt is cut down, and we saw that. We will focus on opening up the economy. Perhaps it wasn't the best decision at the rate it was done, but that was done because it was strong enough. Certainly we need that kind of push now. We will have the
Xhanti, your issue is leadership. So let's talk about leadership. President Zuma tomorrow addresses the nation. It's the State of the Nation speech. What should he say, Dr. Botha, that what needs to be done? What should be done, and what does he need to tell the nation? And that will turn around the fortunes of this economy.
Well, I would like him to mention the fact that we have the #1 constitution in the world in terms of its adherence to the UN Charter on Human Rights. And that came about after 3 arduous years of negotiations at the World Trade Center, which is now a casino. That's quite ironic. But and then go on and say, okay, what we need now in South Africa is we need people to sit around a table, leaders from all segments of society, and tell us what should our priorities be, what ideas, what pragmatic and practical ideas.
Come on, we've been talking and talking, we have the NDP, we are full of plans, but we don't seem to implement.
No, but we must take that one step forward. We must ask, if you ask a business person, okay, how did you create, somebody that created jobs last year, how did you do that? How can we create more jobs? If you can just restore the functionality at some local authorities, especially Limpopo, Northwest, I think we're all aware of those problems. If you can expedite the judicial process against the people where there's prima facie evidence of corruption, you get in task teams with the necessary skills, project management, engineering, to take over the functionality, transfer the skills. If you can just do that, you can probably create a hell of a lot of jobs, because now the money flows through to the maintenance, of infrastructure, the building of infrastructure.
xhanti Payi, give me your thoughts. What does President Zuma need to say?
Look, I mean, the thing is that we have diagnosed the problems in the country. The NDP is quite clear, and I think everybody agrees we know what the problems are. I think what he needs to do now is to say, in terms of priorities, where will he look to do in the next year, in the next 5 years? Now, we always in this country have things like we have 8 priorities or 5. I mean, that's too many to call a priority. So maybe 3 things that he would like to focus on, and even point out ministers that I'm talking to, this minister and that minister and that minister, and these are the people I'm focusing on to make sure that we're doing this. Even if he picks education, agriculture, and and small business, and say these are the things I'm going to sit on. I will probably forget other things, but this is what I'll do. That would be a much more comforting thing. And then we start to see these reports maybe every 6 months or every year to make sure that the president is with us as we go forward. But certainly we need more directed interventions to make sure we can see and things are changing as fast as possible.
xhanti Payi, I have to leave it there. Dr. Roelof, Botha, thanks both of you for coming through. It's been fascinating, and I hope President Zuma is listening or watching, and he'll follow he'll take a bit of your advice. Thanks so much. After the break, businessman Andy Lekumalo explains how his organization is helping young people start and nurture their own businesses.
News that moves. enca.com.